You ever seen a grown woman scream at a jackhammer like it insulted her pedigree? I have. And not just any woman, Karen Delacroix. Self-appointed HOA president. Community crusader. And destroyer of common sense. That morning, she stood in designer rain boots, shrieking at city workers while her brand new BMW slowly sank into wet clay like a luxury Titanic. But let me back up. Because this all started with a garden. A garden and a railroad. My name's Jack Whitmore. And I live in a place called Elkhorn Ridge. A semi-rural patch of heaven about 30 minutes outside of town. Quiet. Simple. And until recently, completely unremarkable. I bought my land 12 years ago with one very specific feature in mind, a private rail spur. Yep. An actual functioning rail spur that branches off the industrial line nearby. Some folks buy homes for the schools or the kitchen layout. Me? I bought mine for the tracks. See. My old man was a train fanatic. We restored vintage cabooses together. Catalogued rail maps on weekends. Even built a barn just to store our collection. When he passed, I inherited everything, his tools, his manuals, and his dream. The spur was legal. Grandfathered in since the 1940s. Complete with a crossing about 40 feet wide and a proper permit with the city's seal. Nobody cared. Until Karen moved in. Karen Delacroix arrived like a thunderclap wrapped in yoga pants. Fresh off a divorce. She bought her house 3 doors down and immediately began organizing neighborhood trash cleanups and sidewalk petitions like she was running for office in a town nobody voted for. At first, she was just loud. Then she got organized. Somehow. In a feat of paperwork sorcery and suburban manipulation. She managed to form an actual HOA, without a developer. Without a vote. And without a single clue what she was doing. Guess who she appointed as president? I just think this neighborhood deserves better. She told me the first time we met. She looked at my barn like it was made of rotting plywood instead of treated oak. There's a standard we need to uphold. Mr. Whitmore. And that thing. She gestured vaguely at the rail spur. Isn't it? I laughed. Genuinely. I thought she was joking. But then came the orange construction barriers. I got home one Friday to find the crossing to my rail spur, the very same one listed in my deed and filed with the state's transportation board, blocked off like it was a condemned crime scene. A laminated HOA notice flapped in the wind. Stapled to my gate, cease all industrial activity within 7 days. Non-compliance will result in board action. When I confronted her, she stood arms folded in my driveway, sipping kombucha. You can't just have trains in a neighborhood, she said. This is a community. Not a scrapyard. I pulled out the original documentation. Title deed. City permit. Hell. Even the letter from the rail company acknowledging my maintenance rights. She squinted at it like I'd handed her a Denny's menu. This looks outdated, she said. Waving it off. Outdated. That's when I knew this wasn't ignorance, it was delusion. The next week, Karen escalated. She held a board meeting on someone's patio, one I wasn't invited to, and unveiled her grand plan, convert the crossing into a community garden and children's wellness zone. She passed out colorful flyers showing smiling kids swinging directly over my tracks. One poor neighbor asked, is it safe to put playground equipment on a railroad line? Karen smiled like she was on QVC. The tracks are symbolic, she said. Jack hasn't used them in years. She was wrong. I'd rolled my engine down that track less than 2 weeks prior. But see, I didn't argue. I didn't storm the meeting or call a lawyer, not yet. Because I had something Karen didn't, time. And if you've ever had to fight someone who thinks HOA bylaws outrank property law, you know time is your deadliest weapon. I watched them dump gravel, install turf, and plant crepe myrtles right on top of the track. I watched them giggle as they installed a little bench with a butterfly motif and stuck solar lights into the crushed stone. And I smiled. Because I had already made a phone call to the rail company and to a lawyer and to a very quiet Very experienced land surveyor. Karen thought she was reclaiming community space. What she didn't know was that she just invaded an industrial access point with active permits and federally recognized boundaries. And now she was trespassing. But I didn't tell her that, not yet. Because like I said, this all started with a garden. Next time, I'll tell you how it turned into a legal train wreck, with a real train. If you've ever seen someone declare war with a garden hose and a PowerPoint, you've met a Karen. But Karen Delacroix wasn't just any Karen, she was weaponized HOA. The week after she blocked my private rail crossing with neon orange barriers and a laminated violation notice, I noticed strange activity just past my property line. A white work truck pulled up. Two men got out, wearing reflective vests and dragging what looked like bags of soil, a wheelbarrow, and rolls of artificial turf. I walked down the gravel path to where the spur crossed into what was now apparently Karen's kingdom. Morning, I called, already guessing the answer. You boys city contractors? One of them shrugged. Nah. Private job. Some lady hired us. Said it was for a beautification project. Playground and community garden. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. Did she show you a permit? He looked confused. Permit? Ah. She said it was HOA property. It was like watching a toddler try to explain quantum physics. You're standing on a federally documented industrial access point, I said calmly. This spur is active. This crossing is on my deed. And if you lay a single brick without checking that permit, you might end up needing a lawyer instead of a rake. That got their attention. They packed up and drove off, that time. 2 days later, they came back, only now they had more workers, more materials, and a freshly printed HOA banner that read, Future Site of Elkhorn Ridge Community Wellness Garden. There were even fake butterflies zip-tied to bamboo stakes. Karen wasn't backing down, she was doubling down. At the head of the operation stood Karen herself, clipboard in hand, sporting a wide-brimmed sun hat and sunglasses like she was running an HGTV pilot. She marched up to me as I approached the makeshift work zone. Mr. Whitmore, she chirped. You're welcome to attend our community launch on Saturday. There will be juice and small bites. No trains allowed. Of course. Karen, I said, voice flat. This isn't your land. She smiled, thin and venomous. It's shared space now. The HOA ratified the rezoning during our board meeting. Which board? I asked. You, Deborah, and the guy who thought he was signing up for free Costco samples? That wiped the grin off her face. You're interfering with a community initiative, she snapped. You're trespassing on industrial rail infrastructure, I replied, holding up a folder. Recognized by the city, maintained by me, and legally protected. She looked at the paperwork, didn't touch it, and muttered, We'll let the board sort this out. Except the board was her, and two glorified yes men. By Sunday, I had solar lights staked into my track bed, decorative pebbles surrounding the rails, and, my personal favorite, a painted sign that read Train Free Zone, Safe Space for Children. I stood there for 5 minutes just blinking at it. It would have been funny if it weren't terrifying. Not because I was worried, I had the law on my side, but because Karen genuinely believed she could out-paperwork a man with a railroad. She mistook bureaucracy for power and pretended signatures could erase property law. So, I waited. I didn't confront her again. I didn't knock down her benches. I didn't even move the garden gnome she had glued to one of the cross ties. Instead, I made 3 calls. 1. My lawyer. 2. The city's land use office. 3. And most importantly, the regional transportation coordinator for the rail authority. The thing about old infrastructure is that it's dusty, ignored, and full of clauses. And in 2017, during a barn renovation project, I'd had the good sense to update my permits. That little detail Karen waved off as outdated? Yeah, it had a trigger clause. One that said, if the crossing was ever blocked, obstructed, or altered without permission, I could revoke all public access and petition for removal. Meaning, the moment she turned that rail spur into a petunia-filled death trap, she triggered a landmine she couldn't even see. While Karen hosted juice tastings and sent out HOA emails bragging about the upcoming community planting ceremony, I was compiling documentation, photos, dated videos of rail use, copies of my renewed land easement agreements, and a certified land survey that very clearly marked the crossing as mine. Then I started the paperwork. Not to argue to end it, but she didn't know that yet. And I didn't want her to, because sometimes the most satisfying way to fight a petty tyrant is to let them keep building the gallows. Next time Karen gets bold, the HOA votes on something very illegal, and the trap gets ready to spring. By the time the crepe myrtles had started to wilt and the garden gnomes faded under the sun, I'd already made the move that would end everything. Karen thought she'd won. She really did. The laminated flyers, the staged photo ops with local kids holding tiny plastic watering cans, even a feature in the Elkhorn Ridge newsletter titled "Turning Tracks into Togetherness." She thought she'd rewritten reality using pastel mulch and laminated dreams. But beneath all the turf and the fake butterflies, she hadn't noticed the ground was shifting, legally. See, I didn't just own the usage rights to that rail spare, I'd been maintaining it for over a decade. And that meant something to the folks who actually own the land beneath the tracks, the Midwestern Freight Consortium. A rail company that didn't want the liability of private crossings unless they were being properly maintained, which I had done religiously. All it took was one phone call to their land use office. I asked a woman named Brenda the question I'd been waiting to ask: what would it take to buy the land outright? Turned out, not much. They reviewed my file, saw the years of maintenance logs, the updated permits, the legal easements, and within 2 weeks, we inked a deal. I now owned not just the tracks, but the crossing itself, the gravel access pad, and the sliver of property that cut straight through Karen's wellness zone like a cold steel middle finger. I filed everything with the county, quietly. Of course, I wasn't out for spectacle. Not yet. With ownership came authority. And with authority came options. So I exercised one. I filed for temporary closure of the crossing, citing safety violations due to unpermitted structures. In plain English, Karen's fairy garden was now classified as hazardous debris. The city didn't blink. The permit was approved in 48 hours. My crossing, my industrial access point, was now a restricted zone. I had signs printed, steel gates custom ordered, and I called in a work crew to begin clearing and regrading the area, right down to the drainage layer. The goal was simple: wipe away every trace of Karen's glitter-coated land grab. And that's when it happened. It was a Friday morning. Sky overcast and the air thick with the promise of a storm. The crew had just arrived, jackhammers, concrete saws, safety vests, and I was walking the perimeter with my project foreman when we all heard it. The slow, squelching grind of tires spinning in soft earth. We turned and there it was, a sleek, silver BMW X5. Nose tilted slightly downward. Stuck halfway across the crossing, right where the concrete had begun to buckle. Inside, gripping the wheel like she was in a hostage situation, sat Karen Delacroix. She'd driven right through the construction barriers, past the freshly mounted private rail access signs, and onto the trackbed, mud from the recent storm sucking her tires deeper by the second. I walked up slowly, arms crossed. One of the city workers raised an eyebrow. "Want us to call a tow?" Before I could answer, Karen flung the door open, heels sinking into the mud like she was disembarking the Titanic. "You need to stop this right now," she shrieked. "This is sabotage. This is my community." The foreman blinked. "Ma'am, you're parked on a restricted construction zone. This is city-permitted infrastructure work. You're destroying public property," she snapped. I didn't say a word. I just nodded toward the permit posted on the new gate. That's when she noticed the camera crew. Not official ones, just a few teens with phones. One of them was live streaming. I'd find out later it hit 40,000 views by midnight under the title, HOA Karen Gets Stuck Trying to Bulldoze a Railroad. Karen tried to regain control. But it was like watching a cat try to command a courtroom. Her voice cracked. Hands flailing. Demanding someone, anyone, stop the demolition. But this wasn't demolition. It was restoration. On my land. Under my permit. Enforced by city crews. It took 2 hours. 3 sets of chains. And the increasing judgment of a growing crowd to get her car out without damaging the undercarriage. By the time the tow truck finally pulled her free, the crossing had already been cleared of most of her beautification project. The turf. The benches. The flower beds, gone. In its place? Gleaming steel rails and freshly poured gravel. She stood on the edge of it all. Clothes splattered with mud. Eyes darting wildly like a queen who just realized her crown was made of paper. And I stood at the gate. Silent. Sometimes. You don't need to raise your voice to make a point. You just need to file the right documents. And wait for someone like Karen to drive directly into her own defeat. The Monday after Karen's BMW was hauled out of the mud like some kind of fallen monument, I got an email that nearly made me spit out my coffee. It wasn't from Karen. It was from the HOA board, or what was left of it. A formal letter. Complete with the Elkhorn Ridge HOA crest, which, fun fact, Karen had personally designed using a free online logo generator. Signed by Becky Walsh and Miles Tran, Karen's 2 remaining trustees. It declared that the board had unanimously reaffirmed the community improvement plan, including the continued removal of non-conforming industrial features, i.e., my legally protected rail spare. They even attached a contractor proposal. I stared at it in disbelief. Then I laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, no. This was the cold, sharp laugh of a man watching someone accidentally confess to a felony on letterhead. See. What Karen didn't know, what none of them had bothered to check, was that I had already filed a cease and desist order the previous week. And now? I had in my hand a written, time-stamped plan showing they were moving forward anyway, using HOA funds. So I did what any good train-owning neighbor would do. I printed it out, highlighted every line that referenced demolition or unauthorized improvements. Then I filed a formal complaint with the city's Development and Infrastructure Division, attached the documents, and copied a lawyer whose nickname in legal circles is the Shredder. 3 days later, I got a call from City Hall. Mr. Whitmore? Yeah. We're flagging their permit requests. Starting an inquiry into misuse of HOA resources. Do you have anything else? Oh. Did I ever? See. While going through my old land maps for the rail spare, I noticed something curious. A thin strip of land, a remnant of a subdivision parcel from 1979 that never got properly transferred, ran right behind Karen's precious Greenway walking trail. The same area where they'd installed benches, trash cans, and a sad little dog poop station. That strip, still listed under my name. They'd built an entire community park on land they didn't own. So I drafted a letter, simple, professional. It stated that the Elkhorn Ridge HOA was currently occupying land owned by me and that continued use without a lease would constitute encroachment. I gave them 2 options, negotiate a rental agreement, or vacate immediately. I sent it via certified mail and directly to their legal inbox. Karen's reply? A hastily called emergency HOA meeting, advertised through a newsletter so desperate it looked like it had been printed in Comic Sans. I went. Not as a participant, just to watch. The turnout was awkward. Maybe 10 people. A few curious neighbors. One guy from the back row came for the free donuts and left with 3 in his coat pocket. Karen stood at the front, flanked by Becky and Miles. Her voice tightened, cracking. Certain individuals, she said, without looking at me, have chosen to obstruct community progress through intimidation and bad faith claims. But we, Your board are committed to beautifying our neighborhood. Then came the questions, real ones. Is it true the park's built on land we don't own? Why are my HOA dues being spent on private demolition crews? Who signed off on the BMW towing bill? Karen stumbled. She blamed legal confusion, historical plat discrepancies, and then, my personal favorite, the aggressive tactics of individuals exploiting outdated rail laws. Becky's face said it all. Her eyes didn't blink once the whole meeting. By the time it ended, she was pale as drywall. 2 days later, she resigned. Her resignation was short, cold, and filed directly to the city. Miles followed that Friday. And suddenly, Karen wasn't the queen anymore. She was just a lone monarch on a crumbling throne, president of a board with no members, no budget, and no credibility. But she still wasn't done. I received another flyer in the mailbox. This one had Karen's signature in bold, promising a revitalization of the Greenway and accusing external saboteurs of destroying community spirit. It came with a donation request. I laughed again. Not because it was funny, because she still didn't understand. You don't beat a man with a railroad by planting tulips on his property. You beat him with paperwork. He'll bury you in it. Next time, Karen goes rogue. Tries to tear up the tracks, again, and learns that trespassing with a backhoe is how you turn an HOA feud into a criminal case. If Karen Delacroix had one talent, it was persistence. But by the end, even that wasn't enough. After the HOA collapsed from the inside and the city launched its audit, you'd think Karen would retreat, maybe issue a statement, or at least disappear quietly into the HOA sunset. But no. She had one final card to play. She started putting up signs, handwritten ones, sloppy, desperate, taped to lampposts and nailed to wooden stakes like protest placards in a ghost town. Community garden, temporarily closed but not forgotten. Public access will be restored. And my personal favorite, scribbled in red Sharpie on a warped piece of plywood, this is not over. She even taped a note to my mailbox. Torn envelope. No return address. Just 3 crooked words. You'll regret this. I didn't. Because by then, the truth was painfully clear. Karen wasn't running an HOA anymore. She was clinging to a title no one recognized, screaming into the wind while the rest of the neighborhood moved on. And nature? Nature had a sense of humor. That Friday, a storm rolled in, fast, loud, and biblical. Thunder rattled windows. Rain slammed the pavement. The drainage ditches overflowed. And Karen's once proud wellness garden? It turned into a swamp. Turns out, when you block an existing runoff channel with gravel, turf, and ornamental benches, the water doesn't just disappear. It finds a way, and usually into your flower beds. The next morning, I got a call from Gary, the same neighbor who once voted for the HOA just to get free trash bags. Jack, you might wanna come down to the crossing, he said, barely holding back laughter. She's back. The BMW. It's stuck again. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. There it was. Karen's luxury SUV, perched awkwardly on the tracks, rear tires buried in a slurry of mud and mulch. Front bumper pressed up against the newly installed steel gate like it had tried to fight gravity and lost. Apparently, she'd driven onto the crossing during a community photo op she organized last minute, trying to prove that the garden space was still functional in all weather conditions. Her exact words, according to a neighbor's livestream, were, "Let's show them this space still belongs to the people." Spoiler, it didn't. The crew I'd hired for post-storm inspection had just arrived when I pulled up. They stared at the SUV, blinked, and then turned to me. One guy raised an eyebrow. "You want us to jackhammer around it or wait for a tow?" I didn't have to answer. Karen was already out of the car, waving her arms like she was directing a fire drill. "This is harassment. This is public land," she shrieked, pointing at the ground like it owed her an apology. I calmly walked up and pointed to the newly posted city notice, a waterproof, bolted sign that read, Private railroad crossing, access restricted by Order Number 8412. She went quiet. For once. By then, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors in hoodies and rain jackets. A few kids on bikes. And yes, the same teenager with a live stream set up. The comments were brutal. HOA Queen dethroned Liv. BMW can't off-road. Who knew? Call Amtrak. Tell 'em to honk. It took 2 hours. Again. To extract the vehicle without tearing it in half. But this time, no one offered help. No one rallied to her defense. She was alone. The cleanup crew finished their inspection and gave the all clear. The crossing? Dry. Functional. Pristine. My drainage system had done its job. Everything around it had sunk, but not the rails. And that was the last time I saw Karen Delacroix. 3 weeks later, a U-Haul appeared outside her house. No farewell party. No HOA newsletter. Just a grim-faced woman loading boxes into the back while the neighborhood pretended not to watch. Word is she tried starting another HOA in her new suburb. It didn't work. Apparently, someone Googled her name during the first meeting. The moment her old HOA history popped up, the group disbanded before the coffee even cooled. As for Elkhorn Ridge, it changed. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But you could feel it. People stopped whispering about bylaws and started talking like neighbors again. I even had one couple knock on my door with their kids in tow, just to ask if they could see the old locomotive. I didn't charge admission. Didn't make a show of it. I just opened the barn doors, flipped the lights, and let them see a piece of history. Then, I did one last thing. I had a steam whistle installed on the crossing gate, an old-fashioned, hand-pulled beauty my dad restored decades ago. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. I give it one long, echoing blast. Not out of spite, just tradition. A weekly reminder that some things are earned, not dictated. And no matter how many rules someone prints, how many laminated violations they issue, or how high they stack their delusions, it only takes a man with a deed, a train, and a little patience to bring the whole fantasy crashing down.